for being with us today. We appreciate your time. The chair calls Katie Ulse, Chief Executive Officer, Texas Alliance of Child and Family Services.
Good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure what to say. I'm Katie Ulse with the Texas Alliance of Child and Family Services, and thank you so much, Chairman Bonin and Vice Chair, members of the committee, for inviting me to testify today. I'm here representing the provider perspective on the child welfare system, and before I start, first of all, I am mindful of the time, so I will breeze through my slides and not cover things that have already been covered, but I do want to say it is an honor to work alongside Commissioner Muth. She has only been on the job, I think you said 6 short weeks, but already we are seeing the value of her experience and her leadership. A lot of progress has been made since I last chatted with you, and a big part of that is because of you all and this body and the investment you've made in meaningful solutions to systemic issues that have really been something we've grappled with for a very, very long time. Because of your long day and more on the agenda, I'm really just going to share right now kind of what I hope is the key takeaway of my contribution to today's conversation, which is on slide 2, you'll see that we spend a lot of time focusing on the state agency and DFPS, but almost all of the services across the full continuum, and I'm talking about primary prevention, child abuse prevention, maltreatment prevention, foster care, family services, youth services, adoption, post-adoption, behavioral health, all of those and many more are delivered by community-based organizations, nonprofits, faith-based, mission-based, and that is who I'm here representing today. Slide 3, all of the data that's been presented already by Commissioner Muth, really meaningful data, and I provided just a couple of snapshot data factoids there on slide 3. I think for the conclusion I would draw from all of this is that things are shifting, and they're shifting rapidly. No longer are we as a state overly reliant on removals, and instead have a real opportunity to work with families. There's a philosophical change across the country, and here in Texas, we recognize that the old-fashioned way of taking a child out of their home and keeping that child over here and fixing the family is no longer the best for the child or the family. And so we had an expected decrease in removals. That was by design, that was intentional. What we did not expect was a corresponding decrease in family services. We would have expected to have seen, with a decrease in removals, an increase in in-home services for families that might have substantiated abuse or neglect. I think, Representative Howard, that is a real opportunity for us. You talked about the Families First Prevention Services Act. I couldn't agree more. I think we have to design a plan around that and build out the community capacity. We have money available now to invest in seeding some of those programs. The Families First Act is, I kind of define it in sort of 2 buckets. There's the bucket that addresses the foster care side, and 4E funding for a designated array of services. QRTP is one of those settings. But on the prevention side, 4E funding can be drawn down, 50% matched by the state, for a slate of programs on the clearinghouse. There are 54 programs today on the clearinghouse. And if you want to draw down that money and you want to serve families under the Families First Act, you have got to use those programs, and we do not have enough capacity in the state currently. But we could invest in growing that capacity to then ready ourselves and position ourselves to be able to serve those families. I do want to talk about foster care capacity, moving on to slide 4, because as hard as we do try, and we do try, there will be kids that do need foster care services, and hopefully that's for a limited amount of time. Several months ago, we were facing historic numbers of children sleeping in offices or other unlicensed settings, and that set into motion a lot of efforts and funding by the state to stabilize capacity, particularly for those youth with more acute needs. Capacity building is so much more than adding beds. It's really about the skilled workforce and caregivers, clinical services, crisis intervention, and all kinds of other supports like transportation and navigating healthcare and the educational system and courts. There's still work to be done, but a lot of this work that we have done is paying off. The legacy system, the numbers of children in unlicensed settings has steadily decreased, and as Commissioner Muth said in CBC, we've seen little to no CWAP. Slide 5, we've talked a lot about, capacity, and there's all these empty beds, and why are we having this crisis or kids without placement? It's very complicated, and there are external drivers that are really impacting the system. And slide 5 lists a few of those system drivers that our network has faced in the last few years. The rising cost of care has been a significant challenge for providers. They feel this through inflation like everybody else. If they want to feed scrambled eggs to those kids, it's costing more money, gas for the van and gas for the car. Not to mention the significant challenge of paying for insurance. I know nobody wants to hear this, but insurance costs, based on a survey that we conducted, have risen between 70 and 100%, and that's if you can find someone to cover you, if you can find a carrier. Another contributing factor to the resource needs is the regulatory environment, and that is a really general term that you hear all the time, and that does not mean any one entity or agency. It's not just HHSC. It's really the combination of all of the entities whose job it is to make sure kids are safe in the foster care system, and that includes HHSC, but also DFPS investigators, CPS caseworkers, heightened monitors, contract monitors, accrediting bodies, and so many more. More is being required, the bar is being raised, and it's our job to work together with the state to strike that balance between elevating the quality of care, ensuring safety of children at all times, and maintaining flexibility to meet the individual needs of children. And providers are responding to this shift by hiring compliance officers, bringing on data systems and technology, adding administrative support to help with documentation and files. They're hiring people to exceed ratios when they can to make sure they're able to serve those kids that might need more one-on-one supervision. But all of this is outside the daily rate and what's currently funded. And I guess workforce challenges have already been discussed, and so I won't belabor that point, but workforce challenges are very present in our world as well. And so this is human work, and we have to have high quality, well supervised, well trained, highly skilled humans to work with our kids and families. Moving on to slide 6. Just to briefly recap, last session, you set in motion meaningful solutions to some of those systemic challenges. I won't go through these in great detail, but you put in place family preservation pilots for that family first programming to help those families that would otherwise have their children removed and brought into foster care. You continued your investment in expanding community-based care. You provided clear direction and funding for the development of the new foster care rate methodology that Commissioner Muth talked about. And you responded directly to the foster care capacity crisis with some flexible funding grants, as well as a supplement to the daily rates. And that brings us to slide 7, where we are today. And I want to thank you all for House Bill 1. Chairman Bonnet has filed. It is a strong start for kids. Out of the gate, you've got a clear commitment to your community service child welfare providers, in an array of those through implementation of CBC, foster care rate increases, those innovative mental health grants, and you've signaled your support for modernizing that rate methodology. I've talked with several of you on this committee and know that you appreciate your community service providers. You know they're the ones taking care of kids and serving kids, and I will make sure that they know you are working to set them and those that they're serving up for success. Slide 8, I'm not going to go into this. Commissioner Muth will lay out her LAR another time, but there's great stuff in there, and we're super excited about what they've prioritized for the next biennium. Slide 9, I'd like to leave you with a few system improvement recommendations for consideration. There's really 3 things that are listed on this slide that I think will bring the most bang for your buck. First is the $100 million rate increase already in HB1. This is going to bring that daily rate, the foster care rate, closer to the rising cost of care. Also, to continue the supplemental or the add-on, which will really help us with those higher end placements as more acute settings. And then advancing rate modernization, which will really better align the actual needs of kids with the services, and regardless of the setting, it's really about the services that kids need. And finally, referenced on slide 10, we'd like to see continued flexible capacity building funding for both the legacy and the CBC systems, and that includes the soon-to-be onboard new CBC areas. You'll find attached to my testimony or maybe emailed to your offices an interim assessment of the CBC capacity building grants. And so far, we're seeing really promising results of that. As we said, they haven't had any kids in CWAP or without placement in 2023, and even last year, very minimal kids without placement. We're also seeing fewer kids sent out of state, more focus on kinship care. And one program that I'm particularly proud of is that the SSCCs are investing in a program to certify and credential their supervisors. This is the first, or one of the first around the country, to have this kind of investment in professionalizing the private sector workforce and supervisors so that they are better overseeing the cases and their caseworkers. They understand the services that the families need. They are more informed about the court process. So we're really looking forward to that. This is the innovation that you wanted to see in CBC, and we're seeing it happen. And I have every reason to believe that once the legacy grants or the statewide grants from House Bill 5 are circulating, that we're going to see an impact there as well. Slide 11, you've already heard so much incredible testimony today about mental health services. You get it, you know it. Kids that are at risk of or involved with the child welfare system have incredible trauma and need those mental health services. I think what I would add to the discussion really is a complement to the local mental health authorities are community-based providers that are out there credentialed to deliver these services, ready, willing, and able. I think they can be an asset to the state's mental health system, and I'd like to work with you to untangle any snags there that are preventing them from being able to support the mental health needs of children. And slide 12, finally, back to this idea of building services to support kids and families. Last session, you passed Senate Bill 1896 with great language and ideas around provisional kinship licensure. And we've been working with the state to help with those nuts and bolts of that. We want to continue to see movement in this direction. The discussion around kinship care today is really important. The federal government, just yesterday, this is hot off the press, the federal government just released an opportunity for states to weigh in on rules. So up until now, kinship families, relatives, grandmas and grandpas, who want to get licensed so that they get that additional support and the full foster care rate. Up until now, they have had to comply with the regular old licensing process that even foster homes have to do. There's opportunities for waivers and variances, but that's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy. The federal government has always encouraged and incentivized states to progress kinship care, but have never really had a licensing process that was tailored to families. So just yesterday, the federal government sent out information and said to states, weigh in on this, and they're contemplating a special license type just for relatives, which I think would be incredible for our state. Yes. We also, I mentioned earlier, the unexpended Family First Transition Act funds. We're really hopeful that we can advance the goals of Senate Bill 910, House Bill 3041, and Senate Bill 1896 from last session with that funding that's available. That's it. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Members, any questions?